Namaste, Vanakkam, Swagatam, good morning, bonjour, buongiorno. Welcome everyone to our final day of the webinar series on Salutogenesis and Holistic Health. We will begin with a short prayer as in our tradition. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanao Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Gives me great pleasure in welcoming all of you to this final session of our international webinar series on Salutogenesis and Holistic Health, organized by the Institute of Salutogenesis and Complementary Medicine of Sri Balaji Vidyapeeth, deemed to be university, one of India's top healthcare universities, in collaboration with the Indian Yoga Association, Puducherry chapter, the association of all the eminent yoga traditions of India. We would like to offer our gratitude to the father of Salutogenesis, Professor Aaron Antonovsky, and we are celebrating his centennial year in 2023. So it is very beautiful that this event is happening at this time. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to this session our invited resource person, Professor Dr. Georg F Bauer, who is currently keeping the flag of Salutogenesis flying very high through the STARS Society. And it's a great personal and professional honor to have you, sir, with us. We welcome you to today's session. Since 2013, he directs the Division of Public and Organizational Health at the EBPI in the University of Zurich. He is the coordinator of the STARS Society, and his work focuses on positive salutogenic health, especially its development at work and in organizations, which is the topic he's going to be sharing with us today. He studied medicine at universities of Innsbruck, Frankfurt, and Tübingen, and between 1993 and 98 worked at the CDC Prevention Research Center, where he received a master and doctorate of public health at the School of Public Health, Berkeley, and SNF Fellowship. From 2001 to 2006, he managed a division for health promotion research at the Institute of Social and Preventive Medicine in Zurich. Between 2006 and 13, he had a joint appointment with the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology and the University of Zurich, heading a joint research division, a PhD program, and an MAS in the area of work and health. I must say that we are truly privileged to have you with us, Professor Georg Bauer, and we offer our gratitude for you taking time out at this early hour of the day to be with us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ananda, for this very, very kind introduction. And certainly also the gratitude is on my side that you invited me to the opening, so to speak, of your really promising center. And I'm looking forward to really see that really as a start for future collaboration between our two centers in two parts, different parts of the world. So I think that it's really a good starting point to have this exchange. So I'm also very happy that we have a joint presentation today. That's really very, very great. Also, beyond the CV, which you nicely summarized, thanks a lot, I just would like to introduce myself more on a personal note. So why did I come even to the field of salutogenesis? Well, I studied medicine, as you said. When you study medicine, you just see in hospitals there is a big social gradient of health and disease, which means that people with less educational opportunities really become diseased much more early and also suffer much more heavily of disease. And having observed that, I really decided to go into the field of public health to better understand how this inequalities come about. And I found out that really working conditions really can explain a lot of these inequalities. So actually later on, I did a study even in Switzerland, which is a quite rich country. But even in that country, we allow for 7 years of life differences for people who have just basic educational schooling and people academics. Academics live 7 years longer on average in Switzerland, which is amazing. And to understand that, you need to study also working conditions, which can explain most of this gradient actually during working years. And how did I finally encounter salutogenesis? Actually, even when I started my career in public health at my institute, where I'm still working now in 1990, there was already one person heavily working with this concept. Then in Berkeley, I heard a lot about this concept because Antonovsky actually had been visiting Berkeley for a while. I missed him. I never met him in person, but I was very much inspired by his thinking. And this is really informing all my career since then. So just that you know a little bit who I am. So then I will share my screen now. I hope that you now see the full slide.
Not yet the full slide.
Oh, but now this is happening again. Let me see. Sometimes I need to do that. And now?
No, it's still. What you may need to do is, first make it full screen and then share it.
Yeah, this is what I just did.
Okay, it's still showing the side bit.
We should have still tested it before. Let's see. No? No? Then I know.
I think if you stop sharing and share again, it may solve the issue.
Is it correct now?
I'm still showing the other. I think the better option is to stop sharing and then share again. That's what I have done.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a glitch.
But it's now I cannot even. Let me see. No?
No, we are not seeing any screen. Actually, we cannot see you also now, so I'm not too sure what's happening there. Now
Does it work now?
Perfect. But now we cannot see you.
Ananda?
Now we cannot, we can see the full screen, but not you. So maybe your video is off.
Yeah, let's switch the video now because, okay, let me see.
But the screen is full now.
I can start now.
Perfect.
Oh, now it works now. Okay, I'm really sorry. We should have tested that before. Normally it works. I'm very, very sorry. But now let's start again and that will be better now. Okay, sorry. Okay, so after having done this personal introduction, I just would like to show you briefly what Ananda basically said. I'm chairing the Center of Salutogenesis at the University of Zurich, where we basically do research in this field of work and organizations. Beyond that, I'm chairing this global working group, where we are really devoted to advance the concept of salutogenesis and the science related to that. And last but not least, some years ago, we founded the Society for Theory and Research in Salutogenesis. And here I really would like to invite you to join if you did not already do so. It's a free membership. and you got a lot of interesting informations on it. As you see, we are a growing community with people coming from many different countries, and India is like on the 5th place, so to speak, regarding membership numbers. So it's really nice to have many people also from your country. And you see also the fields where people work in who are part of this society. So please join, and this is how it will look next month. We will set up this new homepage where you'll find a lot of interesting resources. You will be able to participate actively in this thing, to blog and so on, find a lot of interesting news. So please, join there if you didn't do so yet. Now let's start with the program. I thought it's still interesting and important to make clear when we talk about salutogenesis, there's not one single meaning of salutogenesis. Together with my colleague Maurice Mittelmark, we published this chapter where we really explained basically overall, so there are probably even more meanings, but 3 core meanings when you look into the literature, how people use the concept of salutogenesis differently. After having introduced that, I would like to start first with the working life, introducing work-related sense of coherence as a promising concept to study working life, but then also to refer to this job demands resource model as an alternative complementary model, how we can study salutogenesis at work. That's more, let's say, research-related things I will show here. Then we will move into practice, where I will show how we can apply this kind of knowledge to really promote salutogenic organizations. So that will be much more applied. Also related to that, there's a very promising emerging concept, which is called job grafting, where people are encouraged and enabled to proactively really change their own working life. And last but not least, I will draw some conclusions how I think we could and should advance the salutogenesis model in the future. And also, I would like to make one remark here. As you have seen in my educational background, and also when you see the research we do, it's all heavily building on the Western perspective. So please bear with me if this is not all applicable to your context, because certainly I assume very much that you, I mean, besides for sure having a different culture overall, but even organizations are run in different ways in your context compared to like in the European context. So please be aware this is very much building on this specific context. And if you would apply these things, you certainly would need to reflect, adapt, and even develop new stuff for your specific context. So I don't want to be misunderstood that this should apply everywhere. Okay. So the 3 meanings, I mean, certainly we all know that Antonovsky has been or had been developing this complete salutogenic model of health, which is depicted here at the right-hand corner, which is quite complex. And this is probably also the reason why it doesn't get so much attention, both in research and practice, because it's very complex. So people tend to focus on the sense of coherence as really one of the core concepts of the model, which is certainly not the whole model. It's just one part, still an important part for sure. And then there is a third way of reading salutogenesis. As you all know, pathogenesis is about the origin of disease, and salutogenesis is about origin of health. So that's quite a broad concept that can be even applied beyond how Antonovsky has really framed as a salutogenic model. And I will show you also how we build more on this broader salutogenic positive orientation, which goes beyond the original model, actually. This is why I think also draws a conclusion we should expand the model. Certainly you are all aware of this model. I just would like to introduce this very simplified version, because this helps us also to understand the research I will be presenting now. You all know that in the salutogenic model, it starts out with the life situation where we encounter different stressors, demands, but also certainly have available general assistance resources to deal and cope with these demands. And in doing so, our sense of coherence certainly is very helpful, because when we have this general orientation towards life as being comprehensible, manageable, and meaningful, then it's more likely that we do not assess things so much as negative stressors, or even if we do so, we at least have the resources available to deal with that. And that will help us to have life experiences which we perceive as more consistent, We will have a better balance between the stressors and resources. And last not least, we feel as an active part of life, with this being part of decision-making in life. And that certainly will all move us on the right-hand side, hopefully more towards the ease end. So that's like the salutogenic model, which you certainly are in a nutshell. So if we now apply that to the working life, we certainly can adapt it, also specify this model for the working life. So this is the first thing we thought some years ago. We all know about this general global sense of coherence depicted here at the bottom, which is certainly running through our whole life, both longitudinally, but also when we encounter different life situations, our family life, private life, otherwise, and working life. And so, on the other hand, we do make different experiences at work, at home. And so it would be interesting if also this kind of daily different experiences would trigger something like, in our case, a context-specific sense of coherence, a work-related sense of coherence, where we would like to understand is it possible to really conceptualize work as being comprehensible, as manageable, and as meaningful, not my whole life. And that might be different. So maybe I have a very chaotic private life, but a very stable and comprehensible and so on working life, or the other way around. You might have a very chaotic situation in your work situation, and luckily a very stable, comprehensible, meaningful private life, and that might balance out each other. So we thought it's very interesting to really conceptualize sense of coherence for the specific context of working life by creating this work-related sense of coherence, first a concept and then the scale. And as you see here, so we define work-stock as a coherent works experience, which is perceived as comprehensible, manageable, and meaningful. And it's an interactive concept because it's both influenced by your generic stock. Certainly with generic stock is very strong. It makes it much more likely that you can perceive your working life as coherent. But also certainly it's very much influenced by the actual working conditions, which you can partly change, but not always. We need a scale. Okay, sorry, it's animated. I didn't remember. So since we want to develop a scale, when you go into working life, you obviously do have very short scales because companies don't want to spend a lot of time people filling out, employees filling out surveys. So we took the regional scale, which is in German now, the full SOC scale, and went into the books of Antonovsky and tried to understand which concepts are standing behind the scales. And based on this analysis, we developed finally the scale, which you see here. So we have a very simple way of asking the work-related sense of coherence by really just using keywords which are contrasted, such as it's manageable, my job, or it's unmanageable, or it's meaningless, or it's meaningful. So people can fill that out very easily in a very fast way. And as you see, the scale still has a very good reliability with a Cronbach's alpha of 0.83. So I think it's a very useful scale, and also we can show a factor structure with the 3 subdimensions as we would hope for. Now you can certainly apply that to practice, and actually we can do show, or this research which is cited down here shows that indeed if you have more job resources available, you have a stronger work-related sense of coherence, and if you have more job demands, it will diminish your level of work-related sense of coherence. If this work-related sense of coherence is strong, indeed, you also have better positive health outcomes, and you will, such as engagement, for example, well-being, and reduce negative health outcomes such as burnout. And there's also kind of gain spiral, because when you have a strong work-related sense of coherence, you are better able to perceive your job as resourceful and find with resources and even enhance them. And so longitudinally, you find a gain spiral. Oh yeah, and certainly not unimportant. Also, we could show that certainly when you have a work-related sense of coherence over time, it will also contribute to your general sense of coherence. And meanwhile, we do have different versions available. I think it's not available in your language yet, but could certainly be also translated to your language. And all this is available on our STARS website, also with some instructions how to use this scale. Others have used also the idea that you could use these 3 dimensions of sense of coherence for more qualitative research. In this research group here, they used it to really map how people here in the specific working conditions in a hospital perceive their job as comprehensible, manageable, and meaningful. And they use these categories for inductively doing interviews and grouping the different topics which popped up into these 3 dimensions as a very meaningful framework to people. Well, what we observed when we use this measure in companies, first say, oh, it's interesting to work with this concept, we need to explain it, what it is, and then they say it's a very interesting scale, but they cannot remember the name, coherence. It's too abstract. It does not resonate with the language they normally use. And so we decided, maybe we need a different story. But again, this is an experience we made in our European context in companies. It might be different in India. Maybe fair companies would say coherence, wow, that's exactly what resonates well with our culture. This is what we want to promote, and then this kind of concept would be perfect. Again, this is something you would need to try out. So we thought, what else could we do? And now we thought we follow rather this time, more the salutogenic orientation. What do I mean with a salutogenic orientation? I already briefly explained, but it's really about this looking at the positive side of health, if you want, okay? Now you need to explain that a little bit better, and I know you are also part of educating medical people and other medical professions. And I find this model, which we had been developing some years ago, quite useful to show how pathogenesis and salutogenesis are related to each other. And also you need to be always very careful that we do not tell people pathogenesis is out. That's old-fashioned. We need to do only salutogenesis, but we really consider that as a complementary concept. And I think this is very nicely depicted in this model here, because it says certainly on the one side, on the right-hand side, you do have these risk factors, and if they are really strong, it's very likely that you develop some ill health or disease. And fortunately, there are also with resources, and if they are really strong, it's more likely that you will really develop positive health, where we will discuss more about this later. And you see in this model, there's not even the sense of coherence. It would be part of this individual level, the small bubble on the bottom, a personal resource which helps you to interact better with this relevant environments. But it's not even needed in this overall explanation of salutogenesis, and we just say it's a mirror concept of pathogenesis. Okay, so we built on that. And this was in 2006 when we published that. And then, surprisingly, in 2007, some colleagues, certainly not inspired by my model at all, but it's a completely different field, they came up with this very interesting model, which is called the job demands and resources model. And this model, again, has 2 parallel paths, as you can sense here. Let me see, I have it here. On the one hand, on the top, it's very much like the pathogenic path, because they claim that when these job demands are really high, then it's very likely that you will develop strain and burnout, and that will be not good for organizational outcomes. And on the other hand, on the bottom, if you have a lot of job resources, then it's very likely that you are more motivated. They measure that by engagement. You're really engaged for your job, and that again would be certainly good for the organization in the end. Again, very much resonating with this idea of pathogenesis and salutogenesis. And this is why we combined these 2 models into this job demands resource health model, as we call it. And this is shown here. That's now some empirical study, and let me explain it because it might look a little bit complicated in the first hand. First of all, I should say this model we developed and tested as part of a large-scale intervention study where we did interventions in many rather big companies, but from very diverse sectors, hospitals, administration, production, and so on. And so we had a very large number of employees in the sample with very diverse jobs, certainly, and also on different hierarchical levels. And when we tried out or aimed for finding the core demands which really apply across this diversity of professions and also the key resources, and that we did with some qualitative and quantitative research. And in the end, what we found that really indeed there are some core job demands, things which you probably also know from your own working life, that you have a lot of time pressure, not much time to do your job well, unclear roles, you are qualitatively overloaded, which means you do not feel sufficiently qualified. And if these demands are rather high, then this 0.35 are more or less like a correlation. Then this is quite strongly correlated towards the negative health outcomes, which are very common in working life nowadays, sleeping problems, people feel exhausted, or have some musculoskeletal pain experience. That's the one side of the model, the negative side, the pathogenic side. And then luckily we are also with resources, things which you also probably don't find surprising. It has to do also with your task. You want to have some control, some decision latitude in your task, but you also want to have a holistic task, not some narrow, small, meaningless task, but it should be a more complete task you have. And if these resources are strong, with job resources, then you see a very, very strong correlation association with positive health outcomes of 0.86. So actually, the amount of association you can in the structural correlation model, a structural equation model, is somehow between 0 and 1. So 0, there would be no association. 1 would be the maximum possible association. So it's nearly closer to the possible maximum with association of job resources with positive health outcomes, which we operationalized here as job satisfaction, being committed and enthusiastic about your job, which is very much about work engagement. So it's very powerful, you know, to show to companies, if you enhance resources in your job, you really assure or make it much or very likely that people really are engaged in your job. In addition, we also found this cross-cutting relationship between your job resources and going up here to the negative health with association of minus 0.43, which means this job resources also buffer the negative effect of the high job demands. Even if you have all these demands, but you have this great supportive environment and this appreciation, it makes it much more likely that you don't suffer so much. So again, this is exactly what Antonovsky would have predicted. This resource help you to protect your health, actually. And last not least, there's also a very strong correlation, negative correlation between these job resources and these job demands. And that means that when you have this very good work environment and an interesting task, then it's much less likely that even these job demands occur, which is not surprising, because if I have good colleagues, a good supervisor, and if there is some role unclarity or I'm under high time pressure, I can approach these people and tell them, and we find a solution. And this is why it's much more likely that you have less job demands. So we really have multiple positive effects of strengthening with resources, not only avoiding negative health outcomes, you reduce the likelihood of demands in the first place and create this positive health outcomes. So this is why I think rightly health promotion is very much focusing on strengthening resources in life in general, and here also in working life. And by the way, if you have any urgent questions for clarification, please just raise your hand and we can certainly take that also in between. Okay, that's a very complicated model. My only message here is I just wanted to show you this article, which you might want to look up. But also this good working environment is really even important, or even more important maybe, for people who suffer from some disease. Here we did this study with people who suffer from multiple sclerosis, and with people hopefully still can stay in the job. And what we could show here, independent of the level or severity of their disease, the degree of job resources they experience predict very much if they still feel engaged in their job and if they can really stay in the job. So they are much less likely to leave the job if they have resources. Even suffering with strong resources can help them to stay engaged in their working life. That's even more important also for people suffering from disease. Yeah, and bringing that together, certainly we now see that we do have this overall job demands resource health model, and that certainly can be combined with the sense of coherence model, and where we also again did a lot of research, how also a sense of coherence is really important for the positive side of health development. So sense of coherence does not only help us in times of high stimuli, negative stimuli, high stressors, but also it helps us to really thrive on the positive side, because if we have a strong sense of coherence, you really are also able to mobilize with job resources which help you to develop a positive health experience beyond coping. Okay, with that, let's now become a little bit more applied and just need to check the time, how much I have left. Yeah, that's perfect, actually. Very good. When you enter companies, you need to have a good storyline, so people are getting engaged in the intervention you are offering. And so we found out again that this kind of story, that each job has two phases, which is a nice image created by Kurt Lewin, one of the first psychologists. So it does have its negative parts, a job with demands which will lead to exhaustion and disease, but it does also often have its positive aspects which lead to engagement, energy, and thriving. And so there's a very simple goal when you enter interventions or companies to do interventions. It's really about balancing these demands and resources in companies. So it's a very simple story which is easy to convey to companies. And to make it a little bit more complex, we use that type of model in our interventions in company and say, let's see, when you want to be a successful, sustainable company and still also have healthy employees, it's certainly important to reduce unnecessary job demands and to boost with job resources. And that you can do on the one hand by really enhancing individual capacities and get your people engaged, and also you need to really assess the structure of your company and the culture in order to make it more likely that they have a good balance. That's basically the storyline, and also that really it's a shared goal. Both employees benefit with their health and the company with sustainable performance, and it's a shared responsibility because both employees and the organization can contribute to a better working life. And certainly what we do not normally actually include are this concept of salutogenesis in a more narrow sense, so the sense of coherence that could be just plugged into the middle here, because that certainly will mediate, moderate all these relationships. And nowadays, I don't know how it is in India, but nowadays people in companies even talk much more about meaningfulness. So now when we go into companies, we even promise that people have more opportunities to find meaningfulness in their working life when you do this type of interventions. And the company will have a clearer purpose towards society at large. When the next step is that we do measure the degree of job demands and the degree of job resources with very short survey instruments. And by doing so, you can build a sum index of all the demands and all the resources experienced by employees. When you make a ratio, you divide the amount of resources by the amount of demands and get this ratio. And as higher the ratio is, the number, as better as a relationship between resources and demands is. And if you get low, if you have a bad ratio, then everything goes down. So when you have more exhaustion, more absenteeism, less engagement, and also less productivity. So that's a very strong storyline for companies who need to provide a good balance between demands and resources, because then everyone really benefits, both the employee and also the productivity of the company. And then how can you enhance it? When we run workshops, we map together with people first on the leadership level what their strongest job demands and resources are, and then they create activities, measures to improve this balance for themselves as a leadership team. And to first start with the leaders, because it's important that they experience the benefit of going through this type of improvement process of creating a better balance between demands and resources. because when we do so, we are highly motivated, and we are also capable of running similar workshops with our own teams. And this is what they can do in the next round, and run similar workshops for improving the balance between demands and resources. And why is it a salutogenic intervention? I think we can again very nicely refer to this model, because by introducing this simple image of balancing job demands resources with two sides of working life, we will really offer a very simple mental model where everyone in the company can relate to, which will enhance the consistency in the company. And we also observed when we introduced this model that people suddenly talk about demands and resources in working life, which they didn't do before. Then certainly the aim of balancing job demands resources is very much the load balance contained in the salutogenic model. So it really will enhance this load balance. And by doing it in a strongly, heavily participatory way with kind of improvement companies, with both leaders and employees at large, it certainly will enhance this life experience of participation and being involved in decision-making. And again, this makes it a very strong salutogenic intervention in the working world. Okay, with that, I will go very briefly into this very recent development, and then I will come to my conclusion how we could advance the salutogenic model. Well, the new kid on the block, so to speak, for some years now is this concept of crafting, which is very interesting because you all know about coping. Coping is very much really about how you react and deal and overcome stimuli you are bombarded with, as Antonovsky would say, but it's more kind of reactive behavior. Crafting, on the other hand, is a very proactive behavior. So you think about what is really important to you, and you try to shape your working life proactively in this manner. You do not wait just for the stimuli which you are bombarded by. You take a proactive stand. And there are many different models which measure that. I don't want to go into. I think the most promising one is that really we start out with these needs. We all have some needs for positive experiences, such as being affiliated, mastery, experiencing meaning, also experiencing autonomy, which we call approach needs, positively connotated needs. And on the other hand, we do have this need also certainly for recovery. And for that, we need to detach and relax, otherwise we will run into burnout and other health issues. And so the idea is that you really reflect on your current need satisfactions. And if you, for example, need more meaning, then you would go into your job and try to think about how I would experience more meaning in my working life. Or you could also certainly go into your private life on the bottom here and do something to improve or find more meaning by doing different new type of leisure time activities. And that will then finally contribute to better need satisfaction and well-being outcomes. And that we do a lot of research currently on, and we really can show these relationships which are postulated by this model. So I will skip that now because we have not so much time left. I just would like to show you here that indeed, as we postulated, a strong sense of coherence would not only help us to deal in a reactive way with stresses, but also it's related to being more strong in this case, in off-job grafting. So people who have a strong sense of coherence also tend to proactively shape their private life in a sense, in a way that they better can satisfy their needs, and that indeed also leads to mental well-being. So partly still certainly sense of coherence is directly related to mental well-being, but it's also partially mediated by this off-job grafting behavior, which means we now can really better understand and explain how a sense of coherence really translates into mental well-being outcomes. Okay, with that, I come to the conclusion. I think I still have, 3 minutes maybe for that. As you have seen now, I talked a lot about this salutogenic orientation, which is really linking positive resources towards positive health outcomes. And that part somehow, which is called the salutogenic orientation, is actually not really contained in the original model. Because as you can see here in this original model, we certainly do have this resistance resources contained in the model. But resistance resources certainly is only a meaningful concept in the face of something negative. So this is something you will need here, down here, to avoid something or combating something negative, a negative stimulus. But beyond having this negative stimuli up here, you do have a lot of positive stimuli, which would immediately activate you in a positive way. So somehow beyond resistance resources, we also need a concept which we call thriving resources, resources which would activate you positively and lead to a positive health experience. So this is one thing which you would need to add. The second thing is here on the right-hand side. As you can see, the ease disease continuum sounds like a complete health continuum. But from my point of view, it's not. You again need to go into the original literature of salutogenesis, how he defines actually the ease end. And here you find that it's really defined in a negative way, meaning it's defined by the absence of certain things, not by the presence of positive things, but absence of negative things, absence of pain, absence of functional limitations, absence of need for, or actually it's a negative professional prognosis. So if you think this person needs urgently treatment, then again, yeah. So it's the absence also for this need of treatment. All negative criteria, so we need to add something positive here. And that is what we suggest. I always try to make it clear by citing actually Antonovsky. He's very much interested in the origin of health, the ease disease continuum in a very stressful environment. He very much talks about the fitness of the swimmer to survive the dangerous river of life. And again, in this situation, certainly the sense of coherence is a very important personal resources to overcome these difficult situations. But luckily, we are not always swimming only in a dangerous river of life. Also, sometimes we are even swimming in a very resourceful environment. And mostly it's happening both at the same time. That's the point here. So I still think we could also add the question about the origin of positive health in a resourceful environment, a joyful and purposeful swimming to thrive in a resourceful river of life. And again, I'm not saying that only one is correct. Both is happening, I think, simultaneously. Sometimes we are very much in this stressful environment, in this very dangerous river, and sometimes, luckily, we can also, again, find more, resourceful times and situations. And I think this kind of expansion of the salutogenic model is really needed also from a health promotion point of view, because as you probably all know, in the WHO Ottawa Charter on Health Promotion, health is really defined as a positive concept, emphasizing social and personal resources. And health is created and lived by people within the settings of their everyday life where they learn, work, play, and love. And hopefully agree that all this type of experience are not well characterized by only a dangerous river of life, but also a joyful river of life. And having said that, my suggestion is to really expand this model by adding a positive path where we add here also beyond resistance resources, thriving resources, which would help us to also make it more likely that we have this positive health experiences. And in addition, we should go beyond the ease disease continuum and add an additional positive continuum of positive health, which I call positive health and thriving. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that beautiful, very clear and comprehensive depiction of how salutogenesis comes into the work, and not just work, but work-life balance also. Because we often have the tendency to think as work is different, life is different. And then you find those people who are so immersed in work, they forget there's something called life also. So, you know, to find that balance and how they impact each other.
Yeah.
I especially was very taken by the crafting concept. I think this crafting concept is very much in tune with what we perceive here in yoga as taking the inner resource, empowering the individual to change the way they perceive the world around themselves and change the response to it. So I think this crafting is a beautiful concept, and I think it's going to become a pet for me in my own work, because, you know, I was looking for a word, and crafting as a word and as a concept implies what we are trying to do from inside rather than outside.
Yeah.
I think this is,
so this is why I think the exchange is so interesting. So you would say you would apply that more to like inner crafting, how you look at the world.
Yes.
And then you might still also say that this kind of inner crafting would certainly also lead to a change how you can approach the world and even change the world.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Because again, one of the concepts very strong in India is that, you know, you are the world ultimately. So the world is not different than you. So when you change yourself, you change the world. It's similar to what Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. So for us, there's a lot of that. And I especially loved in the end where you brought in the positive aspect of thriving, because we have for too long been locked in a survival mode. We are locked in a survival mode where everything is linked to survival. And we have to move out of that into flourishing and thriving, which I realize is a very important part of your work. So could I ask you for a few minutes to, you know, just give us a little more on thriving and flourishing?
Yeah, very good. Okay, I prepared that even, so maybe I just share the screen again. Hopefully this time it works.
Perfect.
Let me see. Yeah, thriving. I mean, certainly this is used very differently by different people. Like here, just two references: experience of development and success, or the experience of vitality and learning. And there's this other person here, Corey Keyes, who is calling it flourishing, which is also, I think, a very interesting concept. There's even a scale, which is measuring more of psychological and social well-being with flourishing. And this model is very interesting because it also shows what I just postulated, that beyond the ease-disease continuum, there should be additional orthogonal continuum of this thriving. Because if you have a single continuum, always the problem is if you move more towards disease, by definition, you lose positive health, which is not always true. In our studies of people with MS, you even have something like benefit finding. People reassess their life. They suddenly will find much more meaning in their life, because before they were just running for life. Through the disease, they are triggered to reflect their life. They strengthen their social relationships. They improve their lifestyle and so on. So I'm not saying it's great to have MS, not at all. But for some people, that even enhances positive health. And so this is why I think it's so important to have this dual continuum. That's one important message here. And then I think there are many ways of really defining positive health. And there's this one definition of WHO, which defines health as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential. It's really making the best out of yourself. I think what you described also before, certainly it still requires good coping with negative situations, but also, and this I like a lot about this definition, you can work productively and fruitfully. Maybe work is not the best word, but being active, I would say, maybe also beyond work, as you said, also in private life, I want to be productive and fruitfully, and really make a contribution to society at large. And that last part is also, I think, a nice expansion of social health in a positive way, not only being supported by, but even contributing to our meaningful society environment. So I think this is a very nice way to put it. And certainly there are other people who are talking about positive health, like the PERMA model and so on. There are always similar concepts shown here. I think there's just not one single answer what this positive health and thriving would be about. You probably know that Antonovsky was very hesitant to talk about something like positive health and well-being, because he was afraid that when again very mean governments would misuse that to force people to live in a certain way, which I can certainly understand based on this Jewish terrible history they suffered through. But I think if we really understand the power, there's one person, Goldstein, he's called, in the 1930s, he already said that health is really about the power to define your own norms of health, which I think is really a very important part of positive health. In negative health, it's left to the experts. You have this international classification of disease and functioning and so on. In the positive world of health, I think we certainly would need to leave it up to individuals, but also communities to find their own definition and way of living and experience positive health.
Thank you for that extra sharing, which really sort of fills a few more gaps in my knowledge base. So I really love this way it comes together. And as you said, to also be aware that these concepts are not misused, because one of the dangers of many of these positive concepts, wellness concepts, are that it can be misused in a wrong context. And this is something that we always stress, that it has to be within its contextual framework. There's a framework required for it. I would like to open the floor for any questions or comments. We have at least 10 minutes. If anybody would like to share anything or ask anything, you can just unmute, or maybe Professor Ingen, you would like to say something?
Yes, thank you for a very interesting talk. I work at the University of Science and Technology in Norway, and in a psychology department, and I'm associated with the part that is working with work and organizational psychology. So obviously these concepts that you're discussing, especially job crafting and a job demands resource model, is very much used. It was also interesting to me that towards the end you were trying to combine salutogenesis with concepts from positive psychology. That was something I was talking about a little bit earlier in this seminar series. And I think it's very interesting what you started with, that in people's work life, you really see these strong, almost class distinctions, that some people have a job with less autonomy, less resources, and it really impacts not only their health, but actually how long or how short they live. So I was thinking about this notion of meaningfulness and whether you can relate that to job autonomy in some way. Is that something that you have been thinking about or working with?
So do you suggest, Ingun, that then autonomy would contribute towards meaningfulness particularly?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say, I mean, we tried in the beginning to somehow see if certain dimensions of these 3 dimensions of regulated sense of coherence, comprehensibility, manageability, and meaningfulness would be particularly strongly associated with certain job characteristics, and we couldn't really find that. I would think always, I mean, meaningfulness is like the higher order construct, if you want to say so. I think first you need to certainly understand what's going on in your job. What I showed also certainly know from the research, that to having a clear role and position in the company or in the team is really important, and then certainly good information flow in the company to have even this comprehensibility as a very basic experience. And then if you have that, certainly you want to have this balance of demands and resources, and certainly autonomy would play a very important role for this balance. But I think if the company has a purpose which is completely off and you cannot identify at all with, then it's very hard to find this meaningfulness in your job, you know. So I think that's even influenced also by this higher order, also the culture of the company, and certainly particularly the mission or the purpose of this company, and by your comprehensibility and manageability of your job. So I think it's a kind of higher order concept, you know, which is influenced by even more things than just autonomy.
Yeah, and one notion that has also been discussed a lot in creating this positive job culture is to be able to have people identify with the company, with the good visions or goals. And so would you say that these salutogenic concepts can be used to create a more positive job culture where people feel a stronger sense of belonging, and that they can feel that they identify more with this institution or workplace?
Also a very good question. I would say, again, the process, also when we follow the salutogenic model, the process of participation is really key. That you really involve people in really looking at the working life, how they experience it now, and also involving people, and all people, as you also mentioned again, I mean, particularly those people who have the poorer jobs in the company, that they also have an opportunity to reflect about how they can improve for even very simple jobs. So, for example, we did also some projects with people in the cleaning profession, where they just clean, you know, the university or hospitals and so on. On the first sight, a very meaningless job, but it's very meaningful because they provide a good learning environment at universities, a very good heating environment in hospitals, and where again also we used, for example, interventions where cleaning personnel was allowed to show how they clean to the other staff in the hospital, so they got more appreciation about the important role they have in the company. So I would absolutely say we can make a difference, but show and upgrade the standing or the perception of these different jobs in a company, and particularly also involving people improving the job. And also the cleaning personnel had a lot of very creative ideas how this job could be improved. And also what we certainly know from crafting research, that some people manage to clean, not only clean, but if you, for example, go into the room where the patient is, they also chat with the patient and even contribute to a good healing experience of the patient beyond the physical side by creating this kind of being connected and supported in this very stressful hospital environment. Yeah, so.
Thank you.
Anybody else would like to make a comment or a question before we move on to the second part of the day? So I would like to express our gratitude to Professor Georg F Bauer for this marvelous presentation that has opened us to new dimensions, because being in the hospital setup, educational setup, we often don't think of it as work. So it's good to have that. And I think we may take up your scales and try some work with our own university people to see what is the type of work, salutogenic ambience or the work here, which would be interesting to know, because you have both the positives and the negatives always. So it would be interesting to do a good study. Thank you very much for this presentation. And I now request Dr. Meena to take forward the second part, because being the speaker for the second part, I think it's not fair for me to introduce myself. So over to you, Dr. Meena.
Thank you very much, sir. Such a privilege to be introducing.
Just one second. I forgot to do it.
Yes. So namaste all. So wonderful to be, sharing this biodata, not just reading out about Dr. Balayogi sir, whom we fondly call him as Dr. Sir or Ananda sir. Yogacharya, Dr. Ananda Balayogi Bhavanani. Multifaceted, multidimensioned, as we say, panchakoshas, that different levels of existence of the human being. Sir, he's so very multifaceted personality, skillful in each and everything that he is doing. A friend, a philosopher, a guide. I can just go on, but let me just make it short, because I know he has a PPT ready, which seemed quite long for me, knowing how much he can say from each word of that slide. So, sir, Dr. Ananda sir is the director and professor of the Institute of Salutogenesis and Complementary Medicine at Sri Balaji Vidyapeeth, the son and the successor of Yoga Maharishi, Dr. Swami Geetananda Giri Guru Maharaj, and Yogacharini Meenakshi Devi Bhavanani, fondly called again as Ammaji by all of us. And to his credit, he has 19 DVDs, 50 books and compilations, 13 copyrights, and more than 300 papers and abstracts with, huge citations, H index, and blah, blah, blah. Without, all this, you just type the name Ananda Balayogi Bhavanani. Most of the papers from India, I think, will come under his name. The work that we are doing here at ISCM. So it will be under his name. Classical Indian vocalist, a percussionist with mridangam, and a composer, a choreographer. And that's why I said he's a multifaceted personality. And a consultant and yoga expert for WHO, honorary advisor for the International Association of Yoga Therapists in USA, and World Yoga Foundation, Australasian Association of Yoga Therapists. And he is a member of the steering committee of the Yoga Certification Board, a national board for promotion and development of yoga and naturopathy, standing finance committee CCRYN, steering committee Yoga Certification Board, International Yoga Day, a National Diabetes Mellitus Program, Ministry of Ayush, under the Ministry of Ayush of Government of India. Apart from all this, such a wonderful leader who can guide and take all of us ahead. We are so immature-ish that, sometimes we wonder what we are doing. But for Ananda sir, we will be nowhere. So thank you, sir, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meena. I would like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to my whole team here at ISCM, the ISCM team, the schools of yoga therapy and music therapy, who enable us to take things forward. So it's a tough job to follow Dr. Georg, but I'm going to take it forward and do my best, sharing some concepts that are part of what we are doing here, concepts that enable us to manifest whatever we are doing at the ISCM. So the concept that I wanted to bring forth today is Purnam, salutogenic communication of wholesomeness in a clinical setting. And this came as a result of the work that we have been doing over the past decade here, that includes a book chapter on salutogenesis approach to communication in a book on effective medical communication, and a copyright that is in the name of the university in 2020 on the CITER model of salutogenic communication of wholesomeness. So here we come to a few questions, and the first part is that we need to talk about humanistic healthcare. Healthcare professionals in general and medical doctors in particular are today targeted that they lack a humanistic approach. Now, it would be nice as a doctor, I would love to say, no, this is false and it has nothing to do with it and we are all perfect and it's somebody else's wrong perception. This is the defensive that we like to go normally. But then we need to realize that it cannot be wished away. And the reason that we have this happening, the core reason behind it is a over-reliance on a pathogenic disease-modifying focus rather than salutogenic health-promoting focus. And I often say that we have lost sight of the woods for the trees, limiting our search towards disease and illness, forgetting that we as a healthcare provider, what does it mean to provide health? Well, we have to manifest health in the first place. So this is where salutogenesis, an emphasis on patient care that identifies and addresses the causes of health and well-being, comes into the picture. Because it is looking at health promotion and to optimize wellness rather than just deal with disease. And it's a shift in perspective. I would say it's a paradigm shift in the mental process as well as how we communicate with the care seekers and the caregivers. And never forget, healthcare provider means to provide care in the most loving, compassionate, and competent manner as possible. The famous movie Patch Adams, I always say he had it right. You treat a disease, you win or you lose. You treat a person, I guarantee you, you will win no matter what the outcome. And the founding father of modern medicine, William Osler, has said something very similar. The good physician treats the disease. The great physician treats the patient who has the disease. And this is why when we look at the term healing, we find that modern medical therapeutics doesn't focus on healing so much. It is focused on curing. Whereas disciplines like medical anthropology, sociology, the alternate systems of medicine and medical philosophy, they still have that concept. Because what is it to heal? To heal is to achieve or acquire wholeness of a person. That wholeness of a personhood that involves physical, emotional, intellectual, social, and spiritual aspects of the whole human experience. And this is why the paradigm shift needed in clinical communication is from what did I do today to treat disease or illness, and we need to shift to what did I do today to promote health and wellness. This is a paradigm shift that has to come into medical communication. Because health is a dynamic continuum. In the Indian tradition of Swast, it is not just a state to be attained and maintained, but the continuum, the lowest part of the continuum is said to be the lowest vibration, which is death, birth. And the highest point is highest vibration is a conceptual awareness of immortality, that the self that lies within us is immortal. And that is why the mantra says, Asatoma Satgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityorma Amritangamaya. From mortality, may I move towards immortality. Now, in between mortality and immortality lies what we call normal health and disease. And that is why for many, this is a state where they can function without hindrance. But in reality, Indian culture says it is part of our evolutionary process towards innate divinity. Now, this is where the concept of a life well lived, Aristotle called it eudaimonia, and it fulfills a person's ultimate purpose and gives meaning. A eudaimonic happiness, having that sense of flourishing, which we have been talking about, and that is where these concepts can enhance each other. The concept of self-actualization by Maslow. The Japanese culture has given us the concept of ikigai, the meaning and purpose of life. And the Indian tradition looks at swadharma. What is our self-responsibility? Because when we start to live these concepts and communicate these concepts, be it eudaimonia, self-actualization, ikigai, or swadharma, they are helping us to attain that sense of coherence, which is essential for salutogenic well-being. I would like to share a few scenarios here. Operation successful, but patient died. A common situation we find. A young man having abdominal pain for many months. They keep on doing all this test, that test, this doctor to that doctor. But what happens is he is so anxious, they're not able to find the diagnosis. Nobody knows what's wrong. But despite all of that, no one finds time to talk to him or help him feel at ease. Everybody is busy with a mechanical model, fill out the form, write the report, attend the meeting, and he becomes more withdrawn and depressed. And someone says, go to psychiatry, get some medications. And then finally, the D-Day comes. He is going into the operation theater. Parents and family members are outside. No one to provide them strength or support. There's no support. And so, naturally, what happens? To everybody's dismay, 6-hour surgery, patient didn't survive. Operation successful, patient didn't survive. Now what happens? They go into the state of incoherence. The family members break down. Nobody is there to support them. Why? Because you have to write the operation notes. You have to get the death certificate. And so a new intern who still was idealistic about medical care, he says, what to do about those who are left behind? And his friend who had a bit more life experience says, well, if you want to face their anger, go there. If not, mind your business and get on with life. This is the pathogenic approach, which is so common, we have forgotten the humanistic angle. And all that we are worried about is technical precision and filing of reports. This is where we need to bring back the missing link, a caring and compassionate ear to those who are suffering, and lend a supportive shoulder in these devastating times of loss. Now, there's a contrast to this. Patient didn't survive but died in peace. Well, there's a center where they have a holistic regeneration, recuperation for people with terminal cancer. And this person was admitted there for 3 weeks, went through this with great physical, mental, emotional improvement, but he died of his cancer-related complications 4 weeks after the retreat. Now, when the therapist called up the wife to console her, she said, you have given my husband the best present he could get at the end of life. He could leave his body in a much better state of mind and spirit than if he had not attended the retreat. And his daughter said, therapy is not just about curing people, but about helping them to endure it and die with peace, courage, and dignity. This is the salutogenic approach to death and dying. Maybe we cannot prevent it, but we can enable them to live as fully as possible. And this is why an interesting study in 1997 by Livingston and colleagues, they found that doctors who spend 3 minutes longer with the patients never got sued because they felt that communication was there. And these were the doctors who made orienting comments. First, I'll examine you and then we'll talk about the problem, or I will leave time for your questions. They had that skill, the most important skill in healthcare, active listening. And they said, go on, tell me more about it. And last but not least, they had humor. They were far more likely to laugh and be funny. So spend more time with your patients, 3 minutes plus 3 minutes. Be someone who has active listening skills, be humorous, and you don't get sued. Why? Because there was that humanistic angle that promoted salutogenesis in it. And this is why Aaron Antonovsky showed that relatively unstressed people were more resistant to illness than those who were stressed. And this experience of well-being is based on the sense of coherence. So through our words and actions, because it is not just verbal communication, but non-verbal also, can we communicate with our patients in such a way that these concepts come alive? Then the health promoting aspects of healing will start to manifest. We become a friend and guide to help them comprehend their life better, manageability, meaningfulness, purposefulness, all of it starts to come. But this is only possible if we truly know them. And knowing the person takes time and effort. Can we help them to tap into their own inherent potential, to understand, manage their life with purpose? Because many of them are not aware of their capacities and potential. We, as an unbiased external observer, can help them. You know, in India, we have the Ramayana, where there is this character Hanuman, the monkey god, who had all this capacity, but he didn't know about it. I say he had the Hanuman complex. And Jambavan, the wise bear, had to help him out of it by helping him come out of that state where he thought everything is impossible to a state where you move towards I am possible. Moving from impossible to I am possible. And this is where the very stressor, going back to Antonovsky's original concepts here, the very stressor becomes a catalyst for transformative positive health rather than degenerative disease. You know, the stressor is going to be there, but how do you react to it or respond to it? Do you go on that H plus salutogenic pathway or the H minus degenerative breakdown pathogenic pathway? So we have been talking of sense of coherence, but often in clinical, situations, what we see more often is a sense of incoherence. This is more common, where they lose it all. Because when you break the bad news to our patient or the caregiver, when you have to tell somebody they have stage 4 cancer, they may not have more than a month or two, it is going to be immediately a loss of coherence, and the sense of incoherence is what is seen. And a total breakdown occurs. At that point, they feel like nothing makes sense. They cannot manage anything, and there's no purpose in anything. That opposite of the sense of coherence is manifesting in a sense of incoherence. And that is where we, as a compassionate human being, a healthcare provider, must care. That caring is where the compassionate human being comes in, and we have to give them that stable support to grow and heal through mindful living. Because again, a very important point is the meaning in the illness experience. There's a discovery of meaning in the illness experience. As Professor Georg also said that earlier, you don't have to have MS to have it, but those who have MS and have it, the outcomes are going to be different. So when you are able to find that meaning in the illness experience, this is where we need to support them. It's not going to happen automatically. In a hospital, is not an ambience where you really are going to be coherent. You're going to have more, stimuli that makes you incoherent. And this gives us a transcendence of suffering, where suffering gives meaning and transcendence. So here, let us look at another situation, the sense of incoherence. A young man admitted with fever of unknown origin. They kept on doing tests. He became more and more apprehensive and anxious. And finally, an intern. It's never the top people. It's usually the intern who has to break this news. And the intern has no idea what to do, how to handle. And he has to say, yes, you are HIV positive. And the guy breaks down. The relatives who are there start lamenting the fate. And right away, what happens with human beings? The blame game starts. You didn't do this properly. You didn't do that properly. It is all your fault. And people go into this sense of incoherence. A total lack of coherence, manifesting incoherence. And this is where then it takes many days of compassionate counseling, empathic support by the medical team, because before he could come to grips with his diagnosis. But once he came to grip with the diagnosis, you have moved from incoherence to coherence, then he could start to live in a manner that was as healthy as possible. And this is why we need to enhance the perspective with care. One of the things I've learned as a doctor is sometimes just being there for your patient is all that's required. You don't have to open your mouth. You just have to be there for them. Now it can be useful to ask, can I help you in any way? And I am there for you. We will get through this together. These are some of the ways that you can support coherence to manifest. Help them see the bigger picture. Let them understand what is the perspective, because if you enhance your perspective, the same poison that can kill you in dilution becomes medicine. And medicine in concentration can become poison also. That is why when we give people the wider perspective, you are able to help them grow through the experience. And it attenuates the acute emotional response. In fact, the WHO QOL domains, they did a study with about 5,087 respondents. And they found that the spirituality, religion, and personal beliefs can correlate with this. And this is why I often tell people, to an ant, if you are a small ant, every wave is a tsunami. But to the giant, even a tsunami is just a wave. It's all about perspective. And are you going to be an ant or are you going to be a giant? Now, to support this, it is not enough that just the doctors have it or just the nurses or the other staff. As you all pointed out, the cleaning staff, not just cleaning, creating a healthy environment, but also being there for people, talking to them, holding a hand of a person in need may be the best medicine ever needed. But there is something called an optimal healing environment. The Samuli Institute in 2004 talked of a healthcare system that can stimulate and support inherent healing capacity of the patients. I think this is something really that needs to come in. And sometime back, I attended a webinar by the STARS team with an expert from Australia talking about the salutogenic architecture. We need to look at what is the environment, the built environment, and the living and the non-living environment in which the person is there. Because what can you say? Healing is the process of recovery. It's renewal, repair, reintegration that contributes to a person's physical, mental, social, spiritual health and well-being. So you are trying to manifest that which was broken down into pieces. You are trying to make it wholesome once again. And they have given 4 domains. That this optimal healing environment includes the internal domain, the personal wholesomeness, the interpersonal domain, healing relationships. This is where, as a healthcare professional, we are very much part of the healing environment and creating it. Behavioral domain. Can you help them adopt and practice healthy lifestyle? And the external domain, the healing spaces and ecological sustainability. A very beautiful model that supports wellness and optimal health. This is where coming to lifestyle choices. We all know it. Poor lifestyle choices are the key contributors in chronic diseases. But despite understanding it, despite knowing it, most of the time we lack the behavioral skills to sustain the habit. So we know it, but there's a big gap between knowing and doing. So nutritional counseling, exercise training, stress management, yoga therapy, music therapy, all of this is useful. And they find that those who participate in a comprehensive lifestyle modification program, they can have rapid, significant, and clinically meaningful and sustainable improvements. But the problem is, most human beings are unwilling to change their lifestyle. We are always having this issue. And one of my friends who's a diabetologist and endocrinologist shared a recent conversation I'm going to share with you about the difficulty. So the doctor says, is there, and the patient says, "Hi doc, how are my glucose numbers?" "Well, they are not so great. You seem to have pre-diabetes, the stage before diabetes." "Ha ha ha ha, I knew it. My parents are diabetic." Blame somebody. "My parents are diabetic. Give me some medications that I can take once a day." And the doctor says, "Well, I'll give you a better deal. You just need to take medicine 0 times. Let's start some lifestyle changes, diet, exercise." The patient says, "Why?" "So that you can prevent the diabetes and stop it in its tracks." "You mean to say that the best way to prevent diabetes is to live like I already have it?" The doctor's like, "Okay, what do I say?" And the patient finally says, "Why would I want to prevent diabetes? Let it come when it comes and I'll take the medicine." This is a very typical situation we find in our day-to-day clinical conversation. Once the disease comes, I will deal with it. And this is why prevention is easier said than done. So we want to help people move from incoherence to coherence. And many years ago, a friend of mine, a gastric surgeon, talked about this for the first time that I heard it, DADA, where they talk about the psychological turmoil that the individual and family go through when diagnosed with a chronic ailment. The first one is denial. The person denies the condition. They keep on going to other doctors, other labs, getting more tests so that they can prove that they don't have it. Then the anger. They get angry with everyone. Even God doesn't escape the anger. Now, after anger, depression. They sinks into it. There's no escape. And they withdraw from society and friends. And it's like, why me? And that pitiful situation. And if they go through this, the final stage is acceptance, where they decide to accept the problem, face it with courage, and then healing can happen. This is why only when the person comes to the acceptance stage can healing actually occur. So as a medical professional, as a healthcare provider, we need to help people move from denial, anger, depression, which are very much part of incoherence, to acceptance, which is coherence. So DAB is very much incoherence. How soon can we facilitate the movement towards acceptance where they can do something about it? And this is why a heartfelt, caring approach is needed. Everyone wants to be loved, valued, and feel respected. And that is why the support from healthcare providers creates that positive sense of self-esteem, enables healing to manifest naturally. And patients of cancer and cancer survivors have identified social support as a crucial element to cope with illness and to achieve adequate quality of life. The emotional and social support helps cope with the psychological stress and reduces depression, anxiety, disease, and treatment-related symptoms. So they have suggested training in relaxation, meditation, stress management, counseling, talk therapy, healthcare education, social group support, and exercise. This is what we have found here in our work over the past 13 years. Through yoga therapy, music therapy, give this beautiful support system. All the students in our university know it. All our patients know it. All our faculty and staff know it. If they need a support system place, we are there waiting for them to give them that support system. And I would like to conclude with some thoughts from one of my mother's favorites, Viktor Frankl. And in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about it. He tells us so clearly, he says, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given circumstances, to choose one's own way. What a beautiful statement from someone who went through so much. And he gives us hope by saying, if there is meaning in life at all, then there must be a meaning in suffering also. Suffering is an ineradicable part of life, even as fate and death. Without suffering and death, human life cannot be complete. You know, to give us a balance to all our positive thinking, to help us realize that even in those moments of despair, I must remind you, the Bhagavad Gita, the great scripture that has so much of yoga, starts with the despair of Arjuna. Arjuna is in despair. He is in suffering. It's Arjuna Vishada Yoga. And it's at that moment that this great teaching of the Bhagavad Gita is given to him by Lord Krishna. And this is why I would like to offer our gratitude to our former Vice Chancellor, K.R. Seduraman sir, who opened our minds and hearts to salutogenesis more than a decade ago. And what a beautiful statement he said. Becoming whole is what healing is all about. And that movement towards wholesomeness, what is called Purnam, is what we are trying to bring about with our team at the ISCM. The 10 of us have banded together. It's a small institute with 10 members, but well, we are a team. And as my beloved Ammaji, my mother used to say, team is together, everyone achieves more. So as long as we can all be a team, we can achieve what we are here to achieve. So with that final slide, I complete my presentation and hand over to any of you who would like to make a few comments or questions. Any others?
So I'm sure, you know, like while I was introducing, whatever I said, it's like proof now. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. So you had personal experience of how he takes, you know, the concepts through making it so simple, making it so easy that you can understand, digest, and, you know, reproduce it and start applying it in your everyday life. So thank you so much, sir. Wonderful presentation. I should not be saying this. I'll open the floor over to Dr. Professor Georg. Do you want to say something or any questions?
Oh, thanks a lot. It's certainly very nice how you really told a story about how you developed these ideas, and also start with real life stories of people in the hospital, how they can have a very bad experience or could have a much better experience. I think this was a very nice, lively, real life approach to introducing these ideas. I really liked that a lot. I think this kind of storytelling, narratives, using narratives, real life experience of people certainly is very powerful to convey ideas. So I think that was really wonderful. So thanks a lot for sharing that. And I think you also, I mean, this one case also where this person spent this 2 weeks, I think, in this kind of environment, helping him also to go through the experience of finally dying and going in your spiritual, oh my God, spiritual beliefs, certain towards maybe also even immortality. I mean, it was a very good example that often in medicine we really deny death, because this is what we want to avoid. And if it's happening when we were not successful, this is actually how physicians perceive it normally. I'm also a physician by basic training. And I think to overcome that, but this is not just something where you lost the fight, but this is a natural part of life experience, and that even can be accompanied and created in a positive way as a positive experience. I think was also a very important message. I think that is something really doctors would need to much better understand. Yeah. So thanks a lot. It was really very, very impressive.
Thank you very much. And you know what, salutogenesis was just a term that was given to us, like sir was saying, our ex vice chancellor sir, a mentor, a dear person to us, Professor Setu Raman sir, he just brought in this, concept of salutogenesis, which was something where we were just, trying to understand. And one very clear thought was that moving away from pathogenesis to salutogenesis, and the focus, instead of on the factors causing disease, we are focusing on the factors promoting health. But like after joining STARS and after listening to all of you, it's like bits and pieces of the puzzle coming together. And thank you so much for that wonderful presentation of yours. I think Ingan has something to ask or say. Professor Ingan, over to you.
Thank you. As always, Dr. Ananda has very thought-provoking talks. And I think in this context, when speaking about salutogenesis, because one often thinks about that as an approach towards health, focusing on the positive factors. But I also think it's very important to do, as you did in this talk, to talk about healing, because it's always a process towards health. And I think I love this notion of humanistic healthcare. You have also described yoga as a humanistic process. And because when you tell these stories that you told, it becomes so clear the difference between a humanistic healthcare, where you see the person and supports the person instead of just seeing the disease and cure the disease rather than trying to achieve healing. So I know that we are trying here to understand salutogenesis and what we can learn from, but there is also something to bring back to salutogenesis in terms of this notion of Purnam and the humanistic healthcare and healing. How can that relate back to the salutogenetic model? That was my question to Dr. Ananda.
Thank you so much, Professor. Ever since I came to know the term salutogenesis, I think it struck my heart straight and became part of every heartbeat, because suddenly I had a term that brought to life what I was feeling as a health provider. And on one side as a health provider, another side as a yoga practitioner and a teacher, therapist, but also as a human being. So I think one thing that I often find in the salutogenic model, that as this concept of thriving has come into it, I think the term healing needs to come in a bit more. So I think this concept of healing, and again the power within us, I think this is something that the Indian tradition has a lot of emphasis on, is that we have a healing power inside us that has not been awakened. And so facilitating healing, nowadays the term healer has become misunderstood. And so people are running around saying, I am a healer, I am a healer. Who are you healing? Healing is a natural phenomenon. Healing is an inherent God-given phenomenon for each individual, be it a small lizard or it be the human being. We all have that God-given inherent healing capacity, but we can facilitate healing. So I think this concept of facilitating healing is something that actually can come into this system, where along with thriving, along with flourishing, we also bring healing into it. And healing can be facilitated by external agencies. So just like we have the GRR and the SRR, I believe that yoga therapy, music therapy can give us those generalized resistance and specific resistance resources Recently, someone said, where does GRR, SRR fit into yoga and how does yoga fit into it? Yoga and music for me are GRR, but yoga therapy and music therapy are SRR. This is how I'm starting to understand that we are facilitating. A patient comes to me with multiple sclerosis. Now, I am trying to facilitate the inherent healing in that individual. What are the yoga practices? What are the yoga principles? What are the yoga concepts that can facilitate self-healing in that individual? This is actually the approach I am using. Not that I am healing somebody by, though there is something called a healing presence. A healing presence can never be negated. Just being in certain people's, vicinity, you feel better. So yes, that is what we would call prana. So I think these are concepts that can actually bring a new dimension. And, the more I go through the handbook of salutogenesis, the more I feel that we need a chapter on yoga and music therapy when the next edition comes. Thank you for that.
We have Dr. Ananda's Dharma Patni here, Yogacharini Devasena Bhavanani. Ma'am, would you like to say a few words? Any questions? Questions that you cannot raise at home, you can do it now because it's an open platform. So over to you.
Namaste, namaste everyone. Wonderful sections, both the sections, of course, all the sections, including music therapy and yoga therapy, both the, all the sections I enjoyed. And of course, with the Dr. Sir, he makes himself as a therapy actually for everyone. He's a therapy actually. He succeeded in the many of them as I understood. And whether people can, whether get the healing happening, it's on own naturally, but whether with the people, with the therapy, it's helping for them.
Yeah.
How much is helping with the guidance with the therapy?
See, this is where the concept of the Hanuman complex. Hanuman had infinite capacity, but he didn't know his own capacity. So he needed an external agency so that he could understand that he had that infinite healing within him. So similarly, every patient, every client, every living being, I'm not saying just human being, every living being is blessed with that inherent capacity to heal. But to facilitate it, we should be aware of it. Now, most healthcare providers are not trained in healing. So we are always trying to cure, not heal. So we think I will cut out the appendix, I have cured you. I have changed your heart, now I've cured you. I will change your brain and cure you. We think we'll change something. No wonder recently a plumber, he was saying, you should pay us more because we are like doctors. Your pipe in your house had a disease. I have cured your pipe of its disease, so you should pay me like you pay doctors. See, because it has become like that. A car engine mechanic will say, what's the difference between me and a cardiothoracic surgeon? There's a lot of difference between working with, a heart that is pumping and an engine that is not running. An engine running and you having to work with it is very different. That's why cardiothoracic surgeons have to work with a pumping heart, a living heart, not an autopsy. And that's where surgery is different. So we need to understand that moving beyond curing. Somebody has cancer, the surgeon removes the cancer. They do radiation therapy. They say, we have cured you of cancer. The person doesn't feel wholesome. They don't feel healed. They don't feel like themselves. That is where we have to come in and give them that support. So that is where that salutogenic communication. So what I'm suggesting is our communication should focus on salutogenesis. Our communication should empower the individual to provide meaningfulness, enhance their manageability, and give them that beautiful sense of purpose. You have cancer. What is the bigger purpose of you having cancer? Can you find? Now, it is not you giving them solutions. It is them finding the solution by themselves. And this is where creating a space for healing is important. The healing space is so important, where people come into that space and they feel better. They feel, yes, I can do it. I can beat this disease. Because that is where the original salutogenic model came to Antonovsky. Why is it some people turn out healthier and some people don't turn out healthier from that same experience? That was where the question came. That why are some people who went through that suffering coming out better? And that is where salutogenesis came in. So can we facilitate it as a human being? And this is where compassion, empathy, care, willingness to go an extra minute, extra 3 minutes if you don't want to get sued, extra 3 minutes, you don't get a malpractice case against you also. You know, when Professor Georg was talking about taking sense of coherence to workplace, and the companies are like, what is this? What is that term? I think even talking to medical doctors, you know, sense of coherence sometimes may be difficult. This is why the sense of incoherence they would have experienced with their patients. Every doctor who has worked 5 years in a hospital will know the sense of incoherence. And so if you can help them understand that, they will understand sense of coherence better. This is one way to go. Going from the known to the unknown. Every doctor who's worked with patients would have lost patients, would have found this incoherence situation. Use that as an impetus to grow into coherence and salutogenesis.
Thank you very much, sir. So I'm sure you'll all agree, you know, like the difference between curing and healing became very, very clear after bringing in this concept of salutogenesis, which is, you know, like I have seen sir, you know, like address patients, talk to patients, you know, sent in by the hospital doctors who give us referrals. So, you know, like it may take an hour or so to just sit and talk to them. Then just sir was saying, you know, how do you empower them? How do you make them, you know, like coherent? You know, like simply one thought that came to my mind is that, you know, like when the person is in that problem, he's kind of resting or, you know, like he's completely there thinking only about the problem. So his mind, everything, the whole of him is resting in the problem only. He cannot think about anything else. He's in that box where it is just nagging the problem, the problem, the problem. So the whole of his energy is focused only on the problem. Like we were saying, what is like pathogenesis, the factors causing disease. So his focus is on, so how can he get empowered? He's lost all that power to reason and, you know, find out what is his, or the salutogenesis, the comprehensibility. There's no understanding. Leave alone, you know, like what is the purpose, the meaning and all that. So everything is now completely veiled. So by talking, I have seen like when, you know, you're talking to sir, you just sit there, the facilitating atmosphere, the environment is given, and the energy, of course. What has been, you know, like objective, completely, you make them see objectivity, you make them see, you know, like instead of being subjective, my problem, my problem, my problem, you give an external, you know, like from the other perspective. So you are able to make them understand that this problem has a solution, that it is not just a problem and the solution lies within that same problem. So how do you approach that as a external person? I have seen that, you know, like that's why I wanted to share this with you as a healer. I would say sir is a healer, as a therapist, because thousands of people who come here, the yogic counseling, you know, like making them understand another perspective to the same problem, so that they can find the solution to that problem and it becomes easy for them. That's how, like I would say, like we are also fortunate to be in this setup in a hospital where we can see this aspect as well as the medical aspect, and putting them together, we get a different perspective. We have Dr. Rama Reddy sir here, who is both a medical person, a psychiatrist, top leading psychiatrist, as well as he is I would not say student, or he is undergoing his PhD here. We are really again fortunate under Ananda sir to have him here in our department. So bringing both the worlds together, I would say, I would request Rama Reddy sir to share a few words.
Namaste, madam. Namaste, sir. Am I audible, madam? Oh, okay. In Kavyas, they say that Draksha Paka, Karali Paka, and Narikela Paka, depending upon the ability to absorb the things. Dr. Bhavanani sir's lecture will be always Draksha Paka, easily redigested, easily assimilated things like, and easily one can digest the things. So during this webinar, I could find all the three types of the lectures. For example, music therapy lectures are like Kadali Pala Paka, because I'm a novice in that particular department, but I could understand by the ability of their teaching, I could absorb many things. So that is the thing. And certain things are like Narikela Paka, which are almost power packed. For example, morning sir's that lecture, although it is just a 40 minutes lecture, it is something like a course for some 20 hours or so. Each slide has to be pondered about 1 or 2 hours, and each slide has to be thought about. See, we say Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. It is just not listening. It is just not thinking or pondering about it. But we have to meditate on each slide morning lecture. So that type of power-packed lectures also we happen to hear. And also this real comprehensive salutogenesis term, previously I was under the impression that salutogenesis is opposite of pathogenesis, but it is not so. Here we have a concept, Papa karmas and Punya karmas. Punya karmas will never negate Papa karmas. Papa karmas will be stored in a different database CD, and Punya karmas would be stored in a different CD and a database, and we have to undergo both the things. Similarly, here also pathogenesis approach would be there, but salutogenesis would be there to protect everything and to encompass everything, maybe a whole system like. And now suddenly while listening to Sir Bhavanani sir's lecture, why all these days I did not think about this one. In psychiatry, we have got a subdivision called liaison psychiatry, and see why we are not thinking about salutogenesis incorporating in this one. So this is what I am thinking about. And indeed, I'm thinking of inviting Dr. Sir for our state conference. Now I think this is this particular thing. See, the theme for our state psychiatric conference is resilience of psychiatry, beating the odds. Here the odd is this one only. So many odds are there in pathogenesis approach. Why not consultation psychiatry, consultation liaison psychiatry can adopt salutogenesis as its model so that they can get I'm really so happy and very proud of being a student of yours. Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam.
Thank you so much, Rama Reddy sir. I look forward to your invitation to speak to your state psychiatry association. And as you rightly pointed out, initially many times we think of salutogenesis and pathogenesis as being on two different sides. But salutogenesis has within it pathogenesis. That's how I look at it. And maybe Professor Georg can also point that out, that there's the bigger Venn diagram is salutogenesis, pathogenesis can lie within it. So they don't have to be separate, in fact. And like someone coming to me who's healthy wants to promote positive health, that is also salutogenesis. Somebody who has lost the health wants to regain the health, that can also be looked at as from salutogenesis. So it is not that salutogenesis negates pathogenesis, but pathogenic approach negates salutogenesis. This is how I would say it. That the pathogenic paradigm does not look at salutogenesis, but salutogenesis encompasses. So maybe Professor Georg, if you can give some thoughts on that, because I think this is a very core concept.
I fully agree. I mean, this is why I showed this dual health development model and also this expanded salutogenic model in a way which does contain pathogenesis. Certainly, as you rightly say, pathogenesis is only looking at the negative side of health development. But salutogenesis wants to both understand how a bad outcome could occur and what could we do to avoid this negative outcome in a positive, in a preventive sense, by better coping, for example, with stimuli, or also better coping with the disease and reframing the disease I experiences for myself in a positive way to really support this kind of healing process. But certainly, if you want to understand healing and include healing, we also need to understand what works against healing, which would be pathogenesis. So absolutely, this needs to be contained in the model. And I very much certainly like your distinction you introduced again between curing, which is somehow a complete misunderstanding that I can introduce healing from outside only, which is just not possible at all. So healing always needs to happen within a person, and at the best you can support it from outside by providing this kind of healing environment. So I think this is why this concept of healing is really very important to introduce into the thinking. It also provides some, I think, even relief to doctors and nurses that they are not only responsible for the outcome in the end, but it's a co-production really of both the patients and the supportive environment, and both share this responsibility. And in the end, only the patient can heal.
Thank you so much for that beautiful summary. I would like to go ahead and thank each and every one of you who has been part of this Salutogenesis and Holistic Health webinar series. I take this opportunity to thank all our resource persons, our gratitude to each and every one of them, be it our respected Vice Chancellor, sir, our Registrar, sir, Professor Bengt Lindstrom, our Professor Georg Bauer, who's with us today, Avishai Antonovsky, who was with us earlier and also was there today, but had started off. And I must thank Avishai for creating this bridge with the whole world of salutogenesis. Then, of course, Professor Claudia, Professor Srinidhi Parthasarathy, Yogacharya Sridharan sir, our own Professor Ingan, Professor Margaret, and then my whole ISCM team, including Dayanidhi, Balaji, Professor Shobana, and Professor Meena, Vaishali, then our Bhavana and Janita, the whole team who has come together. And I think it's been a wonderful learning experience to have all these resource persons and all our participants. We had a total of 214 registered participants. Many of them are watching the videos because of the time zone differences. And we'll be sharing the feedback form. Once you complete the feedback form, you'll be eligible for your certificate of participation. So that's the minimum we expect. But I would say that many of you who are here today have been regulars in each and every session. So thanking the Global Working Group for Salutogenesis, the STARS Society led by Professor Georg, my own dear Avishai, who now I consider a mentor in salutogenesis, having created this beautiful pathway with everyone, all of you who are part of this event, and remembering the father of salutogenesis, Professor Antonovsky, because being his centenarial year, I feel this is a very good time for us to pay tribute to the man, the legend who has made it possible for us to have this paradigm shift. So thanking each and every one of you for being with us. We will close with the closing prayer at this point. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Sarve Janaha Sukhino Bhavantu Om Shantihi 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 Om. Thank you so much for being with us. Have a wonderful day wherever you are. And Professor Georg, thank you for your time, your sharing, and hoping to have more interactions between that dot of salutogenesis in India with the rest of the dots of salutogenesis in the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.